Hello, everyone. Welcome to my talk on economic self-sovereignty. So let's start with the setting up the definitions on. I define economic self-sovereignty as the ability to carry out day-to-day economic functions with tools that you, the end user, can control. So economic functions are essential for everyone here. It just basically means it involves getting paid for your work, paying for goods and services, delaying the payments for goods and services, for essential things like student loans, ensuring that you can pay for things in the future, enabling the preservation of your purchasing power into the future, the ability to improve the quality of life, the ones who care, contributing to the community, and a very important one, commerce and other mutually beneficial relationships. By control, I actually mean that the tools that allow us to do all of those kinds of things are controllable by the people who actually use them. And control is a spectrum. We'll get back to it a bit later. I would like to start by talking about what is wrong with existing systems, why I was so excited to talk about economic self-sovereignty. So first of all, current systems are not private. Your economic history data, I would argue that it is actually a lot more sensitive than your socials. It is more sensitive that the data that you show in your profiles, which is in the end what you want people to see, and you can also just fake it. The transactional data of your economic history is actually very different. With every single transaction, people are able to tell with 100% accuracy what it is that you buy, what your situation is with terms of relationships, how much you earn, your gender, so much. And this data is 100% accurate. In fact, banks and analysis companies, advertisers, are able to determine just by a couple of your transactions, performing a credit card, who you are with a lot of accuracy. So now that you have the data available for profit corporations to do something about, and there's sometimes other to make profit, another problem is that existing systems are by design exploitative. So there are third parties out there that profit from your labor without your consent. So now you have payment providers, financial intermediaries, advertising companies, and merchants, and probably many other kinds of corporations around there that are profiting the shit out of your data and your individuality, and you get nothing from it, and also you probably weren't even aware of it. So it gets even darker from here. Current systems have also pretty fucked up incentives, as in, for example, they actually are incentivized to make money out of people who, when they get in debt. So here's an example. It's an European example for the ones who come from that side of the world. Klarna, for the ones that don't know, is this fintech company. Basically, the product is once you have the shopping cart on the e-commerce website, how do I get you to commit to paying with the least amount of clicks possible? Like, the user experience is amazing. It's like 2 clicks. I don't even have to enter credit card information. I don't even have the time really to think whether I can afford the thing. But anyways, I actually looked up the history of Klarna, and it is pretty interesting. So in the early days, they had some, process issues, as in they would just send you like a debt collector without sending you the invoice. It turned out that Klarna even had a direct subsidiary that collected debt. And if you just check out the article, it's like very clear. It's obvious to everyone that their best customer is the one that doesn't pay on time. It's the one that does not pay on time. It's even best when they can't even ever pay back the invoice. So now you got the payment providers and the financial intermediaries and advertising companies and merchants that profit the shit out of you being in debt. And that is like pretty messed up. So another issue with current systems is that they are designed to work around fiat currencies. They are not asset agnostic. You as a user, you cannot choose to, for example, leverage an existing currency, local currency, or one that is just not one the ones who support it. That means that they also will derive the limitations of fiat currencies. and that institutions like the Federal Reserve in the US, Bank of England, the European Central Bank, those institutions, they make really lots of decisions. And considering that most people earn in one currency and they keep their savings in one currency, those decisions can lead to strong impact in your personal household and your personal economy. For example, 10% of inflation in the US means that you can afford 10% less this year. That is crazy for arbitrary decisions that they don't even bother explaining to people why they make sense. And it doesn't even only affect locally, right? There are other central banks that actually keep a fraction of the reserve in US dollars. So there is a cascading effect in also other countries. Existing systems are really not neutral. They are subject to the capture by local and foreign governments. Here's a really funny example. So there's this article on Vice. It talks about this instance where PayPal censored a few transactions. This was a guy that made these cute little tardigrade ornaments for your Christmas tree or just like as a keychain. And he was just using PayPal as a platform to like sell those things. And people started to censor the transactions. And it turns out that it's because tardigrade, the word, is in the sanctions list. And so therefore, PayPal goes out there and says anything that has the word tardigrade, we're going to basically blacklist those and censor those. And something funny to notice is that Vice talks about this as like a bug, like it was just an error, but I actually argued that existing systems are designed to act this way. So yeah, sorry to hear that for you guys, but we won't be able to use PayPal to sell Terra merch. Terra is the mascot of one of the languages that we're building. But I have stickers, and unless given them for free, I won't need PayPal. So, but here's a more serious example. The SWIFT protocol is the thing that allows cross-continent or international bank wires to settle. It has a pretty neat history. It started as it was designed to be neutral, and most countries' banks actually follow this protocol. However, over the last decades, it became pretty obvious that in practice, this might not be so neutral. So think of like, if I use this infrastructure, right, and then like, let's make the issue with the lack of neutrality of SWIFT a little bit less abstract. So imagine that I am a restaurant owner from Spain. I'm actually from Spain. And I have the commitment of offering the best paella to my customers. So the color that you see in the paella, which is this yellow color and the very complex flavor, comes from a spice called saffron. Saffron is this red-like spice that comes from flowers. It's very delicate. You have to hand-pick it. And it's actually one of the most expensive spices in the world. And as many of you know, the biggest exporter of saffron is actually Iran. And Iran was now dropped out of SWIFT, and actually now that I used to buy this saffron directly from this provider, and it was the best one, I actually can't do this anymore. I can't pay this provider anymore. So now I am forced by this sanction. I am now forced to look for alternatives, as in I might not be able to get best saffron anymore, and the price might spike because by constraining the commerce with this country's biggest exporter of saffron, it drives up artificially the price of this commodity in this case. And another thing is that we actually have zero control over current systems, even if we rely on them on a day-to-day basis. There are many examples of this, and the fact is that governments can ban cash tomorrow and force you to lose local banks' e-cash systems, or even worse, Visa and MasterCard. Many of you know that if you ever visited China, it is nowadays really hard to pay with cash. I don't think except for a few rural places that you can not use WeChat Pay. But this is not only a phenomena or something that happens in just the Far East, say autocratic governments, they've been them. But it actually happens a lot even in the Western societies, like a lot of Scandinavian countries are going cashless. And I actually think that if the infrastructure for going cashless is local, as in, for example, the Swedish bank offers this solution, and then you say, okay, the Swedish bank is actually owned partially by the government, then your trust model doesn't change, it's fine. But there are a lot of cases where this is not the case. Well, first of all, the banks are usually for-profit entities, so you will never know really when incentive is going to drive them. But I get actually really concerned when a government decides to try to go and practice cashless, but then use infrastructure that comes from the US. So to summarize this, existing systems are not private, they are exploitative, they have backed up incentives, require fiat currencies, not neutral, and they give zero control to its users. So why does economic self-sovereignty matter? We need them for everything, the current systems suck, and at the moment we don't actually have any alternatives. So how does the path towards it look like? We are not starting from zero. As in, ever since Bitcoin launched, we actually have seen lots of alternatives to centralized monetary policies, and some of them even come with some added features. For example, Zcash is an alternative to a centralized monetary policy that comes with shielded transfers privacy features. That's super cool. And then we've also seen with the pioneer by Ethereum, of course, but the release of more and more decentralized world computers, and they enable you to create different assets with different characteristics, allowing us to represent even more things that are in the digital world or even in the real world, I hope to see. But if we were to design this system, what would be the criteria? So alternative systems should enable flexible privacy. They should not be exploitative or at least discourage backed up incentives. They should be asset agnostic and neutral, and designed to be neutral, and it should give as much control to its users as possible. So if I had to focus on the center of the design criteria, I would actually pick control. And control is actually a spectrum. So what's happening in this diagram? I am mostly looking at people or users in three groups: people who are involved in the design and the development of the systems, the people who operate it, and the people who end up just using it. And the ideal end state is the farmost one, where you see as much overlap as possible. And this is actually the only way you can achieve the highest amount of self-sovereignty, the highest amount of self-control over the systems that you depend on, because there is very little incentive. If you're the one that designs a system that operates and uses it, there's very little incentive to screw yourself up. So continuing with the farmost side of the spectrum, right side of the spectrum, the way you can achieve this is by making it really trivial for users to operate the tools themselves, make it really easy to customize tools for the dynamics and incentives that they want. And then there's going to be organically, there's going to be dynamics that favor locality. For example, when there's a system that is local, let's say in your neighborhood, you are actually able to go there and then meet the people who operate it. If they screw something up, you can always ostracize them, so the social enforcement side of it comes as an added benefit. And on the other side of the spectrum, because not everyone wants to be actually so involved, the way you enable control for the very end user, for the ones that actually don't want to operate or design the systems, is by enabling end-to-end integration. But also of not just you have this protocol and you have this tool set and the end users, but also integrate the incentives, and you make it also end-to-end verifiable, as in open source code, and then you make it you lower the barriers a little bit, you make a few things that allow people to actually actively check this protocol or this system is only doing the thing they're supposed to do. So here's an example how you achieve the right side of the spectrum to make it trivial, easy to operate instances. So ANOMA is a set of protocols, and in this case, ANOMA could serve as a settlement layer. Think of Swift, but a decentralized version of it, where it just, for historical reasons, there was the first instance, and the very first instance is a settlement layer that has validators. Validators are the ones that are the equivalent to miners in the proof-of-stake model. They are validators, just entities spread from around the world. So when you start with that, what's important is that the existence of other fractal instances can appear organically. So assume that there's actually a lot of demand for the global instance, so transactions start to become quite expensive. And then there is usually, in the world of economic activities, there is a natural tendency for local solutions to appear. So you can imagine a world where even though it started with one instance, you actually have other versions where are more local. For example, one that in the US, where it's operated by validators and entities that are based in the US, another one of the state of Colorado, et cetera, and go lower level. And what's going to be interesting is that, for example, if you go to the city park instance, and this is one of the neighborhoods around here, people can actually customize the rules. As in, for example, at the moment, there's some defaults in like what it is that you can provide, but you can turn it into the fees are shared equally across all validators that participate in the system. And what's also really cool is that instances can interoperate with each other. You could see how it might make a lot of sense for the instance of Colorado to be connected to the instance of the US, the global one to be connected to all of them, and local instances like the city park instance can decide to say, I don't want to be connected. I might make sense that I'm connected to the instance in Denver, but that's it. But again, not everyone wants to be so involved in like operating everything that they use, right? So here's a quote that I really like. I feel like it really describes the current world. It says, modern humanity is distinguished by Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions like banks and governments, and godlike technology like Ethereum and all the AI and drones that, well, you know what I mean. So even if your words provide this godlike technology, which is self-sovereign coordination mechanisms, self-sovereign economic systems for people, we can expect that some people will just not care, right? So how do we turn Paleolithic emotions into collective goods and collective action? Here's another example. I'm not covering the one that I mentioned before for the settlement layer, but there could be another fractal instance of ANOMA that focuses on enabling multi-asset privacy, also multi-asset shielded transfers. Just the gist of it. This fractal instance of ANOMA is a sovereign chain that has a multi-asset shielded pool, which means that when connected to other sovereign chains, like ones that speak BFT and support IBC, for example, Atom, Osmo, Terra, a bunch of other ones, or when connected to chains that don't speak BFT via custom bridges like Ethereum, you can actually transfer all these assets to ANOMA into the shielded pool. And then all these assets, no matter the nature, be like cryptocurrency, fungible asset, NFT, whatever, they can all share the same anonymity set. By the way, so if any of you accidentally doxed your Ethereum accounts by like using this token thing to pay for lunch, the good news is that you should be able to undox them later this year. But going back to the Paleolithic thing and this entire system. So for end users, how do we turn the Paleolithic emotion of I don't care about privacy? Because actually a lot of people don't, as in the Paleolithic emotion comes from the idea of privacy right now doesn't offer me direct benefits, I can't really see it, even though we all know that it is a universal human right and you can't really be yourself if you're being surveilled all the time, even though if you know that anonymity sets are actually collective goods, they're public goods, even if you do not have anything to hide, providing stronger anonymity sets makes it easier for example, journalists, whistleblowers, all those people who sacrifice themselves to provide you with the truth, which we all need to make sense of this world and we truly benefit from. So anyways, that is the Paleolithic emotion, right? And you can imagine, even if I enable this system, some people might actually not care about privacy. So how do I turn this into, even if I don't care about privacy, how do I turn this behavior into actually using multi-asset shieldable? So the answer would be in the end-to-end integration, also at the end-user interface. So you can play around with incentives like, for example, the shielded transfers are actually cheaper than the transparent transfers. Or you can even go further and say like shielded transfers can actually reward it. People get like an extra when they use this system over transparent ones. So all of a sudden, when there's a user that actually says transparent or private, they actually don't care about private. Usually, they would just go for transparent, right? But in this case, they are actually incentivized to pick the one that is private. Okay, actually that was it. Awa, I'm one of the co-founders of Anoma. Anoma is a suite of protocols for self-sovereign coordination. And yeah, thanks for listening.